Good morning, Little Masters, and welcome back to today's Tolkien Times. I'm the Man of the West, also from the Prancing Pony podcast. Now, we're continuing in a long-expected party, and, well, we're getting closer and closer to the end, as in last week's reading, Lobelia Sackville Baggins took Bilbo's point and his spoons. Today, Merry will keep Frodo company as he visits with some unwelcome guests. This is only a small selection of the assembled presents. Bilbo's residence had got rather cluttered up with things in the course of his long life. It was a tendency of hobbit holes to get cluttered up, for which the custom of giving so many birthday presents was largely responsible. Not, of course, that the birthday presents were always new. There were one or two old mathams of forgotten uses that had circulated all around the district, but Bilbo had usually given new presents and kept those that he received. The old hole was now being cleared a little. Every one of the various parting gifts had labels, written out personally by Bilbo, and several had some point or some joke. But of course, most of the things were given where they would be wanted and welcome. The poorer hobbits, and especially those of Bagshot Row, did very well. Old Gaffer Gamgee got 2 sacks of potatoes, a new spade, a woolen waistcoat, and a bottle of ointment for creaking joints. Old Rory Brandybuck, in return for much hospitality, got a dozen bottles of old Wynyards, a strong red wine from the South Farthing, and now quite mature, as it had been laid down by Bilbo's father. Rory quite forgave Bilbo, and voted him a capital fellow after the first bottle. There was plenty of everything left for Frodo, and of course all the chief treasures, as well as the books, pictures, and more than enough furniture were left in his possession. There was, however, no sign nor mention of money or jewelry. Not a penny piece or a glass bead was given away. Frodo had a very trying time that afternoon. A false rumor that the whole household was being distributed free spread like wildfire, and before long the place was packed with people who had no business there, but could not be kept out. Labels got torn off and mixed, and quarrels broke out. Some people tried to do swaps and deals in the hall, and others tried to make off with minor items not addressed to them, or with anything that seemed unwanted or unwatched. The road to the gate was blocked with barrows and handcarts. In the middle of the commotion, the Sackville Bagginses arrived. Frodo had retired for a while and left his friend Merry Brandybuck to keep an eye on things. When Otho loudly demanded to see Frodo, Merry bowed politely. "He is indisposed," he said. "He is resting."
"Hiding, you mean," said Lobelia. "Anyway, we want to see him, and we mean to see him. Just go and tell him so."
Merry left them a long while in the hall, and they had time to discover their parting gift of spoons. It did not improve their tempers. Eventually, they were shown into the study. Frodo was sitting at a table with a lot of papers in front of him. He looked indisposed, to see Sackville Bagginses at any rate, and he stood up, fidgeting with something in his pocket. But he spoke quite politely. The Sackville Bagginses were rather offensive. They began by offering him bad bargain prices, as between friends, for various valuable and unlabeled things. When Frodo replied that only the things specially directed by Bilbo were being given away, they said the whole affair was very fishy.
"Only one thing is clear to me," said Otho, "and that is that you are doing exceedingly well out of it. I insist on seeing the will."
Otho would have been Bilbo's heir, but for the adoption of Frodo. He read the will carefully and snorted. It was, unfortunately, very clear and correct, according to the legal customs of hobbits, which demand, among other things, 7 signatures of witnesses in red ink.
"Foiled again," he said to his wife. "And after waiting 60 years? Spoons? Fiddlesticks!"
He snapped his fingers under Frodo's nose and stumped off. But Lobelia was not so easily got rid of. A little later, Frodo came out of the study to see how things were going on, and found her still about the place, investigating nooks and corners, and tapping the floors. He escorted her firmly off the premises, after he had relieved her of several small but rather valuable articles that had somehow fallen inside her umbrella. Her face looked as if she were in the throes of thinking out a really crushing parting remark, but all she found to say, turning round on the step, was,
"You'll live to regret it, young fellow. Why didn't you go too? You don't belong here. You're no Baggins. You You're a brandybuck!
Did you hear that, Mary? That was an insult, if you like, said Frodo as he shut the door on her. It was a compliment, said Mary Brandybuck, and so, of course, not true. I love that stuff. The Hobbit humor is so good, and it is scattered throughout the text. It's just the kind of thing that really lightens the mood, even in the darkest of times in the story. Anyway, I love that bit about Bilbo's intentionality in gift giving. He is so good at this, really. I mean, yes, some had a point or a joke, and that's clever enough. Last week's episode had some of my favorite laughs in all of Book 1. But it's the part about how he made efforts to give gifts to hobbits who were not as well off. I mean, remember that Bilbo is, let's be honest, a rich and eccentric member of the landed gentry here in the Shire. But he doesn't forget to take care of folks. And we only hear about the gaffer's gifts explicitly, but it's clearly an example of the type of thoughtfulness and generosity that he exercised in giving gifts to the others on Bagshot Row in particular. And by the way, Rory Brandybuck is definitely not one of the poorer hobbits living on Bagshot Row. He's the master of Buckland. He's Merry's grandfather. But the mention here is to give us another example of the kind of thought and care that Bilbo put into giving gifts. I also love that he didn't re-gift, that all of these were gifts that hadn't been given to him. But rich as he was, not a penny piece or a glass bead was given away. Truth is, he didn't have much left. Now, that would be a long talk through a number of the drafts, but we do learn here in the published version that Frodo said Bilbo had none of the troll's gold left. Merry asked him about it after they encountered the stone trolls, and there we read, Frodo looked at the stone and wished that Bilbo had brought home no treasure more perilous nor less easy to part with. Not at all, he said. Bilbo gave it all away. He told me he did not feel it was really his, as it came from robbers. But as Bilbo and his gifts exit stage right, the focus comes back to Frodo, who's dealing with crazy rumors, looters, and the Sackville Bagginses. I've got to imagine as he put his hand in a pocket and we read that he was fiddling with something, that he was tempted to use the ring, just as Bilbo had done so many times before to disappear. But he doesn't. He faces Lobelia and Otho and politely dealt with them, if maybe a little coolly. We get a glimpse of Hobbit legal custom here with the red ink signatures of 7 witnesses. That's quite the procedure. But obviously, Bilbo had a good law firm that he'd been working with. Perhaps Messrs. Grubb, and Burrows provided their services. You'll remember they were the auctioneers that put his goods up for sale before he came home at the end of The Hobbit. Now, while I'm looking at some hero moments for Lobelia near the end of the story right now with Sean on the main Prancing Pony podcast, things like, I'll give you, Sharky, you dirty thieving ruffians. Well, here she doesn't come off looking so good, does she? I mean, nothing better than a petty thief, really, trying to steal small valuables that she could fit in her weaponized umbrella. But at least that leads to the best insult compliment in the text. You're a brandybuck. I love that. Folks, thank you for joining me for this week's Third Age Thursday. We've got one more Third Age Thursday to go before we finish this chapter, so be sure to come back. Now check out patreon.com/Tolkien Times to learn how you can support the show, get an ad-free feed, join my content council, get a bonus episode every week, and more. And join me again tomorrow on today's Tolkien Times for more from the Lay of Lathian on First Age Friday. If you're watching this on YouTube, please like and subscribe. Follow or subscribe on your podcast apps and follow @Tolkien Times on all your social media. Finally, as Faramir says, go with the goodwill of all good men.